Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Great Storytelling. My name is Michelle Eisenberg, and I am a program assistant here at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit building a better path for entrepreneurs worldwide by improving inclusion, access, and knowledge in entrepreneurship. So as you will see in the chat in a moment, the NASDAQ Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So definitely make sure to check out those links and resources in the chat. And then just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First, let us know where you are dialing in from in the chat. We always love to connect. And second, we are going to open up for live Q&A at the end of the event. So please make sure to submit your questions for us in that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation, and we will try our best to get to as many as possible. And of course, none of what we do could be possible at the center without all of the amazing support from our sponsors, including NASDAQ, Lehigh University, BMO, Airbnb, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, BPM, HubSpot for Startups, and Google Cloud. We are humbled by their contributions and hope you are grateful too. And so before we get started, we always like to launch just a couple polls to step back and see how everyone's feeling today. This first one is going to ask just that. How are you feeling? Fearful, anxious, surviving, or optimistic? Give it just a few moments for folks to submit a response there. Thank you. Thank you. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end this poll, share these results. Awesome. Looks like we got optimism in the lead, but definitely some feelings of surviving and anxiety as well. Hopefully what we got planned today will help with those feelings a bit. So I'm going to stop sharing this poll and launch that second one. What is keeping you up at night? Finance, sales, marketing, scale, pivot, team, or surviving? And this one just helps us understand your current needs as an entrepreneur so we can ensure our programs and resources continue to be meaningful for all of you. All right, looks like we got folks from New Jersey, California, Florida, New Zealand. Ghana, awesome. The UK, Nigeria, awesome. India, OKC, welcome, welcome, everyone. So great to have you all dialing in from all over the place. Super exciting. Awesome. All right, I'm going to end this poll and share these results. All right, looks like finance is in the lead. I think that's pretty fitting for this topic, but we got needs all across the board. So thank you all so much for sharing. I'm going to stop sharing this poll, and without any further delay, please join me in giving the warmest welcome to our special guest, Michael Gaines, principal and founder at Gaines Consulting, Inc. Michael, it is such a pleasure to have you here with us today. We're super excited, and I'm going to pass it right over to you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And what an international crew we have. This is great. Some people are even an entirely different day. So thank you for being up at all hours and times to join us. Before I bring my presentation, I thought I would just tell you a story to explain story. And that is, I've been doing this work for a while, and I read a book that really kind of changed things for me. And it was written by an author named Daniel Pink, who some of you may have heard of. He's like a New York Times writer, thought leader, amalgamates other people's content into something meaningful that people can understand. And he wrote a book called A Whole New Mind about right brain thinking and creativity. And I was really blown away by it in my world of leadership. I thought, there must be something from that I could use to inspire leaders. And I had a really exceptional opportunity to be mentored by a great professor who's now retired at Stanford. And we were at the food court there. This is about a dozen years ago. And I told him all the insight and excitement of reading this book. And I said, Tom, what do you think I should do? He said, well, I think you should go over and talk to David Kelly. I said, you mean David Kelly, who founded IDEO, which some of you may know who IDEO is, big design house, designed the first Apple mouse, industrial designers, amazing thought leaders, and they run the design school at Stanford. And I said, yeah, but I don't know David. He says, no, no, I know him. He's right over there. Go talk to him. He's over there at the other table. And I literally went over to David, rather presumptuous. He'd even talked to me. And I explained the book. He said, oh, yes, I know him. Of course, he knows the author. And I said, what from your world of design is most relevant to my world of leadership? And without skipping a beat, he said, storytelling. He said, storytelling is everything. When we're pitching an idea, whether we're doing industrial design on a project or we're doing a project like a museum where they worked at the SF Museum of Modern Art on how people are going to flow through the space. They worked with Amtrak on the new Accelera line when it came out many years ago and how people would actually buy tickets online all the way to the time they get onto the train. Those are all design problems. And storytelling was required to help users understand how to actually interact with the product. And before we start today, I did look at your questions. Several of you sent in about a dozen questions, and I think I can say that we can address all the things from how do we use this in social media to how do we use this for our business on our website, et cetera. And then hopefully what I can share with you transcends a lot of those environments. So with that, let's get into what storytelling is, and then hopefully you leave with some nuggets of how you can use this in your business. Here's the good news, everyone. We are programmed for stories. It is innate. This is a biological, neurological orientation from the time we are little babes, and hopefully somebody read stories to us when we were growing up. That was an idea to impart knowledge. And we know that this is true because we as a species are up all night telling ourselves stories. And Jonathan Gottschall is a great, kind of storyteller and story of story, if you will, because we know from history, cave art at Latsu, Etruscan vase, all these mediums were mediums of story, of passing on knowledge. So we know this works. We have plenty of data. There's plenty of longitudinal data in history that tells us that storytelling is a really effective medium to communicate information. Now, some of you are very technical oriented and you love data, and that's fantastic, but data needs to come to life, right? And using objectivity, but also imagery and getting that right brain activated is really quite critical. And Ken Kesey, the author, you can look up his books, Acid Kool-Aid Test and such, an amazing writer. He was based out here, actually in Northern Cal for many years. But this idea of you can't just tell people, you need to lead them to making a case. And storytelling is the best vehicle that I've been aware of for doing that. Now, I added this piece because of something that came up in the questions prior. And that is literally, what kinds of stories are there? But also, how do I make sure I'm telling the right kind of story? And so what I'm going to share with you today does not require you to be an English major or a journalism major or a marketing or advertising specialist, but it's something that you can access quite easily. And maybe we're stealing from some of those worlds for us to understand how to best communicate with other people. So one of the things in the advertising world for sure, and those of you in marketing, you know what I'm talking about, is we answer three questions. Who's the audience? What's the voice? And who or what is the protagonist? Now, for those of you who remember some of these terms, I'm going to give you some things that affirm what they mean in the context of storytelling. For audience, obviously, we need to first think about who do we actually want to reach and in what environment for our product or our service. So that's a really important question. Is it on social media? Is it live? Is it through some kind of demonstration, be that virtual or live, et cetera? Is it through print ad? Is it through a YouTube video? Whatever it is, we need to answer the question of who is the audience and where are they viewing what we do? When we do that, then we can understand our audience. We can understand, well, what voice should I be using? There are many voices to use. And if we had more time, I'd show you a bunch of advertising videos from Super Bowl commercials to other things that would tell you that they definitely answer the question of what the voice should be for this campaign. And you have the opportunity to do it in your small, medium, large business as well by asking, do I want to be quirky? Do I want to be funny? Do I want to be encouraging? Do I want to be inspirational? Do I want to be concerned? Right? So if I'm really trying to address something that's a significant environmental issue, maybe I want a voice of concern. But if I want something that's a fun product where I want people to really feel a connection and association to it, maybe it's a quirky, funny kind of message. So voice is a really important question to answer, that we, in essence, want to make sure that we square away before we move forward. Protagonist. Now, I'm going to open the aperture on this one for you a little bit, because if you remember from English class in high school, protagonist was always kind of communicated as a person. But for our purposes, protagonist can be much broader than that. It can be a tech brand. I've taught this class to Airbnb and Dropbox leaders. It can be, the Batman idea. I mean, it can be Laocoon. This is an old Greek mythology. This is supposed to be the story of human agony. I mean, just by a sculpture. So again, who or what is the protagonist in your story? Maybe it is your product. Maybe it is a particular user. Maybe it's you. But that's an important question to answer before we proceed, because it tells us a lot about what we're going to be doing as far as the details of the story go. All right. There are a few different story types. Now, there are more, but I found through doing a lot of work on this and how we distill this down, that three really seem to stand out. And there was a question in the preparation of this around, are there story types beyond, inception of an idea and the people behind it? There probably are, but those are the best ones. So why not use those? So let me give you three from people that you may know from business as a way for people to connect with who and what they are. So one type of story is a story of courage. It's often powerful and adventurous. Another is a story of passion, and another is a story of spark. So AI hasn't taken over so much that it's creating all the products that we use as consumers. So it takes a human to still create the ideas, for the most part, of what we as consumers are going to interact with. So let's kind of unpack these a little bit with some examples of who they are. Now, I assume some of you have owned or own a pair of Tom shoes. By the way, Tom is not a person. It stands for Shoes for Tomorrow. Blake Mykowski is actually the founder of Tom's Shoes. Blake was actually grew up in Arlington, Texas. He was an amateur polo player. He was down in South America. He found that there was these kids that have no shoes at all. If they had shoes, they were kind of a rope shoe, similar to an espadrille, where they would fall apart. And he went back to the States and thought, what if we could put shoes in third world country children's feet and have people that buy the shoes in the first world economy feel a part of it, by which their purchase goes towards the third world. And that was how the Shoes of Tomorrow was born. He wanted to do the right thing first and foremost. And so that was, in essence, how Tom's Shoes came to be. And it was really kind of courage of doing the right thing first and foremost versus I just want to make a lot of money just to make a lot of money. He ended up making a lot of money, but he did it through this lens of, how could we impact other people? Another one is this idea of passion. So some of you know about, this firm, Under Armour. And the founder there, he was a football player at University of Maryland. And he was struck that by practice, halfway through practice and even halfway through games, they would wear these undergarments under the padding. It was kind of a polypropylene material, which was an early wicking material. And it really had a horrible smell to it. And as a result, the players were miserable about it. And so Kevin figured out that there was another way to do it, and he went to the local tailor in College Park, Maryland, and described the problem. And together they thought about the best material to wick was pantyhose material. And the tailor helped him stitch together a shirt made of pantyhose material. Imagine that, coming to a football team locker room with pantyhose on your upper section. But the players tried it and it worked. And then all of a sudden the lacrosse players wanted to use it as well because they have pads in the upper area as well, the male lacrosse players. And then other colleges heard about it. And then that athletic directors started to hear about it. And everyone wanted to start to order Under Armour products. And that's how Under Armour really got started. And so you think about a passion, and he was up against Nike and Reebok and other brands because he expanded his product offering. And all of a sudden it was, truly David and Goliath kind of story. But he persevered because he himself was an athlete and he got those early wins with athletic directors, and then they wanted to sign contracts with Under Armour for their products. Another story is this idea, and we're going to experience more and more of this. Some of you are back in the Northeast right now experiencing this right now, and this is significant weather patterns, right? There's this idea, especially in the Southeast, where a lot of hurricanes happen, etc., by which it would be called the Waffle House Index. So a community would be wiped out by a particular storm, but the Waffle House would find a way to open. They'd maybe get propane tanks in if the electricity was off. It would be a place for people to actually congregate and rely on one another and come back together in a way that would help bring the community slowly back. And they started to call it the Waffle House Index. And I'd call this kind of a lemons to lemonade story and turning a problem and a setback really into an opportunity. Waffle House just wanted to do right by the community, but they turned something that was bad into a good situation where people could come together and start rebuilding their community. So these are some general kind of stories to think about. Another one is that Joan Barnes was living in Marin County, California, and she was struck that there was an opportunity at the Jewish Community Center in San Rafael to do a job share for an after-school play program for exuberant children, which her two daughters were especially in that camp. And they started to realize there was all these kinds of play activities they could start doing with young children and kind of release all that energy. And she ended up meeting somebody who had helped take a couple of fast food chains into franchise mode and started to talk about, could this be something that other communities could benefit from? And they called it originally Kinder Gym, but there was an after school kind of babysitting service called Kinder Care at the time, so they couldn't do that. But they ended up calling it Gymboree. And some of you may or may not know what Gymboree is. Some of you may be old enough to remember. Some of you may not be old enough to remember. It doesn't exist anymore, sadly, but it was this idea of really flipping the convention and using an unusual opportunity and insight as an observer, which is so powerful. We especially know in design thinking, can I be an observer where opportunities arise? And it took off. And she reinvented that company twice. I mean, it was a franchise model, which ended up not being a great business in many ways. So she turned it into books and publishing. Then she turned it into clothing, and there were Gymboree stores, etc. Bain Capital and Bind doesn't exist, but it exists in China now, actually. So there's a whole franchise model. They never got the early Gymboree, and they love it in China. So it's very big over there now and starting to grow even more. So again, three story types, just to kind of recast this. Courage, powerful and adventurous; passion, heartfelt and impactful; and spark, which is really this kind of new imaginative, being the observer, taking in the landscape, etc. And I would submit that all three take into consideration, first and foremost, audience, voice, and protagonist. And I just see a comment in the chat that I led a product division, Gymboree, great company, yeah, while it lasted. And Joan Barnes is still around. She wrote an amazing book, by the way, I think called Let 'Em Play or something like that, if you want to know more about Joan Barnes and her amazing story. All right, very good. So a quote. Maybe the novel is about a murder. Well, who committed the murder? Why did he do it? My job is to retrace the story so that the audience feels the suspense, so that when the climax comes, they're right there with me, listening to my beautiful detective story. It's all about making people care about what happens next. So now let's talk about the mechanics of a story. And you may be surprised. I'll leave the chat open. What kind of person from walk of life you think would have written this? What kind of person from walk of life? Just some quick hits on chat. If anyone wants to take a stab, this is the audience participation part. As best I can do, even though your mics are muted. Is there anyone take a stab? What kind of person would write something like that? Might surprise you. Anyone? Anyone? No, nothing. Okay. No one is willing to take a stab. Oh, there we go. An author? That would be my guess. Thank you, Moss. Appreciate that. Yeah, absolutely. A nurse. Interesting. Oh, that's a twist. Yeah. Oh, a mother. Oh, lovely. How about this person? How about a musician? Yo-Yo Ma, the famed cellist. He wrote that. That's how he views music. When you think about, I used to, even when I would teach this, I would do a Beethoven symphony, and you could see how it would move through the movement, literally, and different staccato crescendos, etc., as it's like a story. And that's how he views music. I mean, much of this is auditory, right? And so this idea of taking someone through the peaks and valleys of your story is really a critical foundational piece to good storytelling. You want to have rapt attention, and that's the way that you do it. Um, and so this idea of being able to have some structure, some construct is what we're going to dive into here. And so there are a few elements that I found really transcend the rational. One is that our story should have a grand entrance, right? There should be something that grabs people's initial attention. If you've taken presentation skills, etc., they often call it the hook. It's the thing that you are able to do to get people's to be focused on you and your message. Another is richness. Your story should have some details to it, some color, some imagery. Somebody can take themselves to that place by the details that you're sharing. And so, I try to describe to you my little story in the beginning. I was at Stanford. I'm in the food court, right? I'm sitting with my mentor. I'm wanting to talk to someone else. There's hopefully, a little bit of richness. Tells you a little bit about who this guy, David Kelly, was. Now, also experience. Does the protagonist move in your story? Is there actual movement by which we're going down a path in some way, metaphorically or literally? And then, not always part of every story and not an absolute requirement, but helpful, is a little bit of anxiety, right? If we think about hero's journey, which is a lot of what this is rooted in, there always have to be this thing of something we had to overcome, something that was difficult, some anxiety. And then, as one boss said to me, as before I learned storytelling, maybe it was a little too verbose at times in team meetings. He said, Gaines, if you had a point, what exactly would it be? Well, we should have a takeaway. And the takeaway is, what is the moral of the story? And I like to think of these as kind of, bookends by which the grand entrance is the thing that I'm nailing first and the takeaway. And then I fill in the other pieces when I'm thinking about the story that I'm going to write. And so if that's helpful to you, fantastic. We're talking about a couple of writing constructs today that are helpful to you that you could take away and start right away with whatever story you need to tell. So grand entrance and takeaway, if this works for you, start with those. What do you want to start with to get people's attention? What do you want to leave them with? And then fill in the richest experience and anxiety afterwards. All right. So no story is completely alike, and not all of them have the same ordering of events. Some are, I jokingly say, the Flemish spelling of Gret. There's no A in the story. It just doesn't lend itself. Don't force it to be there if it's not there. But at least you have the G and the T, the grand entrance and the takeaway, and hopefully the protagonist moves a bit. Hopefully there's some experience there, some richness, some color, etc. The other one might be the British spelling. Maybe the anxiety comes earlier in your story. You don't need to translate this robotically, all right? The G and the T is all I want to encourage you to have as bookends. You can flip the order in the middle all you like. Perfectly fine with me. So again, these are the ways we do it. Now, if you could stay with me here for a moment, I want to show you a video because I want to actually exhibit how this looks in action. Some of you know right out of the gates who this is going to be. And Michelle and Anna, keep me honest if for some reason we can't hear this. But let's go ahead and take a look at this. And here's what I'm going to ask you to do is if you could pay attention to what you think this presenter's G, R, E, A, and T are. Remember, our grand entrance and our takeaway, but what the richness is in the story. Some of the words, right? What's the experience? How did the protagonist, and who was the protagonist or what? And then any anxiety. And we'll have fun and chat with that at the end. Okay, here we go.
When I was young, there was an amazing publication called the Whole Earth Catalog, which was one of the Bibles of my generation. It was created by a fellow named Stuart Brand, not far from here in Menlo Park, and he brought it to life with his poetic touch. This was in the late 60s, before personal computers and desktop publishing, so it was all made with typewriters, scissors, and Polaroid cameras. It was sort of like Google in paperback form 35 years before Google came along. It was idealistic, overflowing with neat tools and great notions. Stuart and his team put out several issues of the Whole Earth Catalog, and then, when it had run its course, they put out a final issue. It was the mid-1970s, and I was your age. On the back cover of their final issue was a photograph of an early morning country road, the kind you might find yourself hitchhiking on if you were so adventurous. Beneath it were the words, "Stay hungry, stay foolish." It was their farewell message as they signed off. Stay hungry, stay foolish. And I have always wished that for myself. And now, as you graduate to begin anew, I wish that for you. Stay hungry, stay foolish. Thank you all very much.
All righty. So quick in the chat, who was this? Do people remember who this person was? I certainly hope so. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Steve Jobs. Excellent. Excellent. So this was a commencement speech at Stanford, sadly, just before he died in 2010. It was just the last 5 minutes. And this was really, something that was inspirational for a lot of people and has been used several times. So I have a few questions in chat, just real quick, the fun little audience participation part here. My first question is, what was the grand entrance? How did he pull you into the story? Where did he take you? Was there a grand entrance there? Any words that, even if it's just a word or two, the back road, yeah, thanks, Teresa. He used a phrase, which was, when I was a kid, right? When I was a kid, there was this catalog called the Whole Earth Catalog. Yeah, that was great, Johannes, excellent. When I was young, exactly. And he takes you to that place, Diane, doesn't he, with the richness, right? The details, what was in it, this exciting ideas. And for those of you who don't remember that, and I don't remember, I was too young, but it had all these ideas for kind of do-it-yourselfers, whether you wanted to build a watering catchment for rainwater in your home or do some kind of solar system or other types of things. He's a pretty amazing guy, Stuart Brand, and started some environmental social governance investment portfolios later in life. But yeah, the richness and that experience of it was really critical as well. Any words that stuck out from the experience? Any words that stuck out from the experience? Something we'd navigate. He had some wording in there, was kind of the Google of its time. Yeah. And so this idea of being able to kind of map it to something else, anchoring to something else that we know is really what he was tracking towards. Who or what was the protagonist? Who or what was the protagonist? Yeah, the anxiety. Thanks, they see. Yeah, the final issue, the back cover. Yeah. Was there any anxiety in this story? Yeah, final back issue, not going to happen anymore. And then the takeaway was stay hungry, stay foolish. Now, some of you say that wasn't super clear, and I could agree with you on that. But the idea was there was an irreverence to this publication that he was trying to bring out, and a curiosity, a do-it-yourself kind of way, a way of maybe being a bit vulnerable, not knowing the answers, being able to take a risk and do something on your own with the help of this really cool catalog. So that was the idea of it. And this idea, yeah, Teresa, I agree, like this childlike, this innocence to it to a degree. And it went away. It doesn't exist anymore. But it was really special to him. And like I said, the Daniel Pink book inspired me. That catalog inspired him. And as you all know, he's very turned on by design, first starting with a love of fonts, etc., and which led, of course, beneath to him being innovative. So that's what we're talking about here. So that's how the great story can be brought to life. That's how we might see it in action. That's how maybe you can steal some ideas back from that. And maybe there's something that you're doing that is truly disruptive, right, to the marketplace. And so that's what we want to help you do. So make it enticing. Grand entrance. Maybe that one's a mystery to you. Like, how do I actually make a grand entrance? Well, let me give you some examples just to have some fun here. Let's see if you know them. I'm going to give you movie and book grand entrances, and we'll see if we can guess what they are. I had the craziest dream last night. I was dancing the White Swan. This is a movie, and I'm curious if anyone knows what that is the opening line to. Don't know if you do. Don't know if you don't see any yet there. I'm waiting for the delay. The Black Swan. The Black Swan. Crazy movie, right? Crazy movie. How about this one? Did you know there are more people, this is a movie, with genius IQs living in China than there are people of any kind living in the United States? It's an opening, very important social media platform that this movie was about. Does that tip help you? They changed their name recently. Great movie if you haven't seen it. Yes, there you go. The Social Network. Well done. Well done. And then how about this one? This one's a book. Let's see if you were paying attention in school. Call Me Ishmael. Some years ago, never mind how long precisely, if they even have this book in schools anymore. Having little or no money in my purse and nothing particular of interest to me on shore, I thought I would sail about. Yes, Moby Dick. Well done, Richard and Moss. And then this one of my favorites of my generation. We were somewhere around there, twice there, sorry, around Barstow on the edge of the desert when the drugs began to take hold. Anyone know this wacky? There's a movie with Johnny Depp. There you go. Fear and Loathing, Anna. Nice. Peter as well. Well played. Hunter S. Thompson, if you haven't read it, it's a wacky ride, as is all of his writing. Johnny Depp played him in a movie. So yes, these are grand entrances. All right. Now, I know they're from movies or from great, books, etc. But my hope is you can take inspiration from these and think about what is the grand entrance of what your of your product, of your service, of what are you doing, right? We had an inspiration. We had something that we saw. We saw an opening. We didn't think it was possible. Any of these things, we were out of money. We had maxed out the credit cards, whatever it is. But pull the audience in to care about what you're about to tell them. So there's another methodology here that you all know so well. And remember at the beginning of this, I said we're programmed for stories from an early age as kids, that we are ready for it. We're receptive. And it's the simplest of all. And it's the grand entrance is like once upon a time. The richness is like every day. The experience is one day. The anxiety is until finally. And the takeaway is because of that. It's a simple flow. I had the chance to visit a friend at Pixar several years ago, and he said, this is where they often start, right? This idea, that movie years ago, Inside Out, this is going to be a certain age little girl, right? Who's going through this anxiety, and she feels all alone, and everything changes until finally, right? Because of that. So all these things follow this kind of, linear flow, and it can go back and forth a little bit. It doesn't always have to be in this order, but again, certainly the once upon a time would be the beginning, and because of that is the takeaway. So don't overthink this. You have at your disposal already the insight and the tools to build this. It's just applying it to your business in particular. So one of the easiest places I find to practice this is your story. We have people from all over the world, various socioeconomic backgrounds, different origin stories of how you came to be and do what you do. And when I do this live with people, we actually get people to tell their own story in a way. It could be something that was the birth of a child, they climbed Kilimanjaro, they were the first to go to college in their family. It could be extraordinary to prosaic. It doesn't matter. It's your story. And the thing that I find when people tell these stories, and I have the listeners of the stories point this out because I get folks in the small groups, is that there's something sprinkled in there which is really powerful. And it's maybe the first kind of foothold for you in thinking about what story you want to tell, and that is your values. And I know you know what a value is, but if you think about them in our three categories of courage, passion, and spark, this idea of likely we have a value that's linking to that. Is it, being innovative? Is perseverance? Is it professionalism? Is it impact? Is it creativity? Whatever it is. And, this question came up, and I see the question there, Teresa, great question. Should I use this in my website? I'd say it depends. You can go to my website and you can see that there's some stories of sorts in there. I didn't tell my origin story in there because my services are beyond me. There's other people that I wanted to represent. But the story I do tell in there is the background, and I tell a little story of how we're kind of quirky and irreverent, because I want people to pay attention that maybe we're a little bit different, or we're the kind of firm that people want to work with. And so I think the answer is it depends. If the service is, or the product is about you and you want people to connect with you, fantastic. That's a choice that works for your audience. Who is your audience, right? So it really just depends on what you're trying to do. But in many cases, yes, if it's a service that involves primarily you, or your inspiration is a really interesting story of how you came up with this product, use it. It's at your disposal. It's gold. It's gold. I'll tell you a quick one. And, they definitely did this. My wife and I had never been in a balloon. And we saved up money to go to Africa and do a safari, and they took us up in a balloon. This was a big deal for us, and they took us up in a balloon in the morning to watch the animals migrate. It was an incredible experience, and I'm so fortunate I had a chance to do it. And in the basket, which is enormous, was another couple with their 10-year-old. And he said to me as we were rising, he said, I used to jump out of these. I said, excuse me? He said, no, I mean, with a wingsuit. I'm a wingsuit guy. I would do it over Las Vegas and do all this stuff. I said, that's absolutely incredible. I said, I've never met anyone who does this on this. Well, I actually used to be a magician. We're actually a professional magician now. And I said, really? I said, that's a great. I said, no, I mean, like cruise ships around the world. He said, I said, that's incredible. Are you still doing this? He said, well, we put it on pause because we had our daughter, and traveling around the world doing magic on cruise ships is not so conducive to raising a child. And I said, what do you do now? He says, well, my parents had this. I'm a parrot trainer. I said, excuse me? What? He said, yeah, parrot, like the bird. I said, interesting. I said, never met one of those before. I said, how did that come to be? He said, well, my parents had this parrot, and it was untrainable seemingly, because people buy parrots at the pet store, and then they get them and they're, horrible. They're really difficult. And I wanted to crack the code on how to train the parrot. So I figured it out. Then I started a whole website with YouTube videos, and now I have, several million followers. And then someone reached out to me with the fact they could store pet food and pet toys. So we vertically integrated, and now we're selling parrot pet toys and food and all that as well. I said, you're by far the most interesting person I've ever met on this other side of the world from me. His story is important to tell for what he's doing, right? That's my point of this. So if that's the case for you, and you have the equivalent of moving from wingsuit jumper magician to parrot trainer, then by all means, please share that story. All right. back to our regular scheduled programming. I want to give you some other tools to think about here. First of all, writing a long story might be overwhelming to you. And so one thing to do is a test is what's called brevity, the micro versus the macro. The macro may be the story of your product, the origin story of you, the origin story of your business, whatever you decide. You've decided on your audience voice protagonist. You've mapped out your great, but sometimes you need things in micro form. We call it a nut graph in journalism. It also be called the lead, LEDE in journalism, lead of the story. The thesis, the closing statement. In the film industry, interesting enough, I did some work with Lionsgate Films. I learned this one called log lines, and is how they used to organize when films were in cans in the library, and they would literally have on the spine, they would have the thematic orientation beyond it being a drama, a comedy, whatever. Speed, that old movie with Keanu Reeves, was called Jaws on a Bus. That was what the log line was for that movie. So, but in business, we call it brevity, right? So be brief, be bright, be gone is sometimes the directive we get from others. And so we want to be concise in what we're doing. And we know this can be done, right? Ernest Hemingway did it when he was given a challenge at a bar. So goes the story in the Everglades at this bar he used to hang out at. He said, "You can't write a story in 6 words." He's like, "Really? For sale. Baby shoes never worn." Oh, your heart just drops. Your heart just drops. So whether that story is 100% true, I don't know. But the idea of being concise can be still very powerful. Some things that I love, this is from a website called Smith. I couldn't cope with it. I wrote songs, Amy Mann. Well, I thought it was funny, Stephen Colbert. I love this one, Amy Tan, who wrote Joy Luck Club and many other great books. Writing's your worst skill. Class clown, class president, town drunk. Don't make me come down there, God. That's a credible source. And look mean, be nice to everyone. My favorite, in the bottom right there, a third grade student. So 6 words can be really powerful, and it forces you to be concise on what is it you're actually looking to communicate. Can it be concisely communicated? Can it go on the back of a business card? So I want you to really think about, for your business or service, what are the 6 words? We used to call elevator pitch. You'd ride the elevator with someone, you'd be able to tell them in an elevator going up to at least the 30th floor, whatever it was, what your business or service is. So 6 words is a fantastic way to do that. So in closing, and we'll leave the rest of the time for Q&A because I've been talking a lot and I want to make sure I get to any questions you have. I had the opportunity to work in the television sports industry as a first career, and Steve Sable, who's sadly no longer with us, did all those beautiful NFL films for those of you fan of the NFL with classical music. And he said, "Tell me a fact and I'll remember, tell me the truth and I'll believe, but tell me a story and I'll hold it in my heart forever." And that's certainly the notion here, is that our brains are programmed for story. Can we communicate our product and service in a way that's concise? Can we do it in a methodology that humans are already oriented towards? And therefore, can we be able to have a little bit greater stickiness to the message that we have for the marketplace? So with that, thank you very much. I'm going to turn over to Michelle to field any questions we're going to have. Super fun kind of virtually speaking to you all. Michelle?
Awesome. Michael, thank you so much. That was so comprehensive. And I just loved all the examples that you gave. There's just so many different, inspirational leaders out there, and I even love the story you told, about the person you met on the balloon. And, that's it really, you can really, find that meaningful story in no matter what the work is that you're doing, or so I thought that was really powerful. Awesome. So yeah, if you're in the audience and you have questions for Michael, make sure to drop it in that Q&A box. We'll try to get to a bunch of them. Awesome. Yeah. So, I wonder if, you could maybe give any examples of, some stories that, maybe have stuck with you from, some businesses that are, more service oriented. I think there can be that, difficulty grappling with like, whose story is really the most meaningful to tell in that kind of type of business. So what are your
Yeah.
thoughts there?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think back to the examples I shared of Gymboree, of Under Armour, of Tom's shoes. I mean, those are all real products and services with people and inspiration, several of those that are service oriented.
Yeah.
And really looking at what the struggle is. I mean, I think one of the most important things to answer for your business is who or what is the protagonist? Are you getting people to identify with you or identify with the product? Does the product come to life, right? I mean, look at things like Aura rings, right? I mean, a very interesting, I mean, that is that thing has a life of its own. And people always want to take it off and show you how it blinks on the inside and all that kind of stuff, right? Like there's a story to that and how people are using. So now there's a duality in the protagonist. There's the ring itself. Now the users are the protagonists too. So again, allow that aperture of protagonist to open up a little bit. I think you'll find some kernels of insight in that because you may end up telling more customer stories on your site of how people connect with your product or service that is equally, if not more powerful than your origin story of how you got there. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that like is great guidance when people are kind of like grappling with like, is it really my story that's the most important to tell or is it the, the customers or is it somebody else? And yeah, so I think that's really poignant guidance. So thank you. We have another question here. We have a ton of entrepreneurs that are obviously looking to close rounds of funding.
Mhm.
Any just, key considerations for, critical elements of your story that you may want to include or kind of just any other best
Yeah.
practices
Well,
there.
look at, I mean, if you just want to get a master class in how to present yourself in the moment with a good, watch, Shark Tank, right?
Yeah.
No, notice what they do. They tell their story. They tell a little bit of their origin story. Those investors want to know what is actually the deal, right? They want to know why you came to this conclusion, right? Why did you come to this need? How did you discover it? It's part of the thing they ask about, and they want to know what their chops are. Are they credible?
Mhm.
Are they reliable as an entrepreneur? So when you're raising money from VC, you sure as heck better have part of it about you because they're backing you as much as they are the product or the idea. They want to know what grit and metal that you have. What are the values that are exuded? If somebody listened to your story, let them play back to you what values they heard in your origin story for your product or service, right? Because that's going to be critical. I mean, you want to know what impression, it sounds one way in the theater of your own mind. You have
Mhm.
to project it out to an audience and see what their impressions are after hearing it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the key. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's such a great point to emphasize that, they really are investing in you and, so that can't always be the same can't always be said, for your customers. So I think that's really, really interesting.
So
Um,
can I jump on Natalie's question there? I love this one.
yeah.
So here's the thing. Work on your bookends first. Um, I'll tell you a real brief story right now. So and as an example of this, of when you think about origin story and why we do what we do, I started in a totally different industry. I was in sports television. I worked at NBC Sports, then I was at Turner Sports in Atlanta. And I was a production manager. I was not very high up on the ladder. And my boss, who was vice president of operations, he reported to the president of my boss's boss, actually. He reported to the president of Turner Sports, called me in his office one day. I was a month into the job, and he said to me very squarely, Michael, do you want my job? Now, I didn't know how to take that exactly, but this was the soft side of career conversations in television in a very different era. And I said, well, Keith, you have your job. He's like, no, dummy, you're not qualified. I mean, one day in the future, would you like to have my job? And and I said, well, I don't know. And I was a pretty brash, arrogant 20-something-year-old. And I said, well, you're on the road all the time. You seem pretty stressed. I don't think your partner sees you very often. no. He's like, well, then you need to get out of here. I said, but I just moved to Atlanta. He said, no, finish the job I hired you to do, finish the baseball season or whatever it was. But if my job does not light you up, right, I want you to go find something that does, because this is the career path in sports operations. It doesn't veer off of this, right? I want you to be happy. I like you. I recruited you, right? But if it's not your calling, go find something else. And
Mhm.
so if you have a story like that, Natalie, of, what you had to persevere through, or somebody had a real frank conversation with you, or you were at your wits' end doing the job that you were doing, that's incredibly inspiring. Because then I know you got the grit, right? And because I want to know where you came from and what you did. And so for me, it's important. I think for a VC, it's important. I think for customers, for the right moments, the right audience, it's important. Um, but that takeaway now for me is that I do mentoring like that for coaches wanting to get into this field. I give back, to them. And I'm still in touch with that boss. I mean, this is many, many years ago, and thank him all the time. So, being open, right? Listening, helping other people, those are the takeaways. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was, that's a really great way to just demonstrate, that guidance. And yeah, I mean, it really is, just a matter of, really taking the time to think, about your experience in particular, and like those moments that you want to convey. So
Yeah. And
um
I loved it. I love some of the things coming up in the chat. There's some great references to some books here, Michelle, I'm seeing. Yeah.
oh
Art of
yeah,
Storytelling, Story Factor from, I haven't read that book, but I'm going to check it out. Thank you for that, Elizabeth.
that's
That's
awesome.
fantastic. What else
Wonderful.
do you see there, Michelle?
Yeah. So yeah, we have a question here that, I think touches on, a couple other questions that we've gotten. This person is asking about like, reframing a weakness into a strength, and, kind of tangentially related to that, we've gotten a couple questions about like, you know, sometimes the story is hard to tell. Sometimes it's sad or uncomfortable, and you want to still lead your audience to a meaningful call to action. And so how do you kind of go about that without leaving them discouraged?
It's all in what that takeaway is, right? It's all, I mean, when you nail the bookends first and then you think about the 6 words, it's like I call it a flex test for your story. Like,
Mhm.
is it leaving the impression you want to leave? Is that what you want to leave with people? Because there could be a sorrowful story, but at the end, it's inspiring, right? There can be, especially when we think about being vulnerable or messing up, getting fired from a job, right? Nobody else would hire us, so I had to be an entrepreneur, right? So that's completely reasonable. And so I would say just practice the bookends first, practice the 6 words, tell it to someone else, get the feedback on what impression is left there. And I think you'll have a good, you'll have a good kind of ready-made story to go. I want to shout out here to Dan Gallant. Dan, former Temple Owl, many, many years after me as a graduate. Hey, Dan, great to hear from you, buddy. He's calling in from Philly. Fantastic. So good on you. Dan's doing training in the pharmaceutical field. So he's a strong Temple made young man that I've mentored here and there. Thanks, Dan. I think that's you. All
Awesome.
right. Cool.
Wonderful. Awesome. I think we have time for one more question. And yeah, I think, this is really interesting. I think sometimes, especially with like tech businesses, entrepreneurs can get lost in, trying to like educate their audience and really help them understand. So where do you kind of, how do you find the balance between storytelling and, informing,
Yeah. So this goes to another piece, which I talk about when I do manager skills development courses, which I've done for years. And that is, where is the person in their cycle of learning? So are they really needing the straight talk express? Because you could ask them questions or tell them a story and try to infer something, and they're never going to get it. But it's dangerous if you do that, right? So they're unconsciously incompetent. They don't know what they don't know. But there's people who are unconsciously competent in what we sports we call in the zone, where they need a little bit of inspiration. Story is great for those people, right? And I can coach them a little bit. I can make subtle references, right? A small nudging or encouragement, great. But when it's people that are at that early stage on a task, just be mindful that it's okay to be direct. It doesn't make you a micromanager, right? It just makes
Yeah.
you a good manager who's modulating your message to where the person is.
I
So,
love that.
yeah.
Yeah, and that, all comes down to kind of like, that entrepreneurial and leadership mindset is being the face of your business. So, I think that's really, really awesome. Michael, this has been such a
Thank
wonderful
you.
presentation and conversation. If you had just one key takeaway or piece of wisdom you wanted to leave with the audience, what would that be?
Be comfortable telling more stories about yourself. It doesn't mean you're going to put people to sleep. Just make sure it's well prepared. And again, I leave that with you. I'll leave you with this. A great Irish playwright from the 1800s, George Bernard Shaw, I'm very much dating things here, said, "My one goal in life is to be used up of all of my talents and then to be discarded like some old husk." So you use me up in storytelling. That's all I got, Michelle. It's a pleasure to be with you
Awesome.
all.
Thank you so much, Michael. On behalf of the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center and everyone here today, we're just super thankful that you joined us.
Thank you. Take care.
Wonderful. And to our audience, we'd love for you to join us again for upcoming webinars, which you can view using those links that are going to be posted in the chat. And thank you all so much for joining us today. We look forward to welcoming you back online with us soon.